sure of yourself, ain't you, Virgil? Virgil, that's a funny name for a nigger boy that comes from Philadelphia. What do they call you up there?
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
Mr. Tibbs! Well, Mr. Wood, take Mr. Tibbs, take him down to the depot, and I mean boy like now.
I'll have the FBI lab send you the report on this. Not that it'll make any difference.
I'll take that.
You won't. I'm sending it in, personally.
Wow. That was a clip from the iconic film In the Heat of the Night, which we will be discussing today. This classic was such an intense, edge-of-your-seat kind of film, so full of suspense and drama, with many of its issues still resonating today. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. On this channel, we review classic Black cinema as well as current film and TV shows in order to explore ideas about race and representation in Hollywood. As I stated earlier, today we're going to be talking about the movie In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier, and we're going to do a brief tribute to the late great actor that has contributed so much to Black cinema and to Hollywood itself. Now back to the 1967 film In the Heat of the Night, Part 1. We begin in Sparta, Mississippi with a police officer named Sam sitting at this dirty hole-in-the-wall diner that really shouldn't be serving food, in my opinion, due to all the flies of it all. He isn't really well liked by the young man serving him food, and we'll find out later that this man who works at the diner plays a major role in the story. Anyway, the police officer leaves for his nightly patrol. He stops and looks at this naked woman standing in front of her window, who is looking back at him, clearly not minding that he's creeping. This whole scene has no real explanation and just feels cringy and weird until, again, we come to find out it plays a major part in the story. Oh, and the woman is not really a grown woman, but actually a 16-year-old girl. Yeah, pretty disturbing. Later, the officer discovers a man lying dead in the street and calls it in. They soon identify this man as an important businessman from Chicago that had come to their town to open a factory. As one officer at the crime scene states, this man had come to open a factory and make something of this town. In the meantime, Sidney Poitier's character, Virgil Tibbs, has just arrived in Sparta by train. But Sparta is not his destination. Virgil has to wait at the train depot for a later train to take him where he really wants to go. And it's here at the train depot that the police officer named Sam sees him and immediately accosts him because he's black. He basically arrests Virgil on the spot and pins the murder on him. And I'm like, wait, what? This man literally just got off a train from Philadelphia and sat down. And the police officer is like, hey, you, black man, you must have just committed a murder. No evidence, no motive, no due process, nothing to tie Virgil to anything other than he just happens to be black? This is nonsense. And worse, the officer takes Virgil into the chief of police, who you would think would have maybe an iota of interest in the law, and just hands Virgil over like, Chief, I found the murderer. And the chief of police is like, hey, thanks, we got our guy. And just immediately pins the entire murder on Virgil. Wow. How easy it must be to solve murders within just hours of a person's untimely demise. They make it look like the job is the easiest job in the world. When Virgil tells the chief he's actually a police officer and calls into his boss back in Philadelphia, the chief has no choice but to backtrack on the murder accusation and release Virgil. Only problem is Virgil's boss demands Virgil use his expertise to help the police investigation in Sparta. And this is when Chief realizes Virgil is not only a police officer, but is actually the #1 homicide expert in Philadelphia. So he decides instead he might be able to use Virgil to solve this crime and maybe do some actual police work after all. Oh my God. Virgil performs the autopsy and collects evidence to be turned over to the FBI, while the chief and his men go out on a police chase for a suspect on foot. Once they apprehend the suspect, the chief, once again, considers this case closed and wants to let Virgil go on his way. By the way, the only reason this man even became a suspect was because he found the dead man's wallet. So let's backtrack here. Within hours of discovering a man's body lying dead in the middle of the street, they've apprehended 2 murder suspects. Murder suspect number 1, accused of the murder because he was black and possibly headed out of town by train, even though it would have been easy to just check the records to find Virgil hadn't even arrived in Sparta yet when the murder happened. Murder suspect number 2, a man, likely a petty thief, took the man's wallet and didn't report the man dead when he discovered him on the street, but then they actually do a quick alibi check and find this man was in a pool hall at the time of the murder. Now, how both of these clearly innocent men wind up behind bars in the same cell together is just mind-blowing. But it's also what makes this film so much fun to watch. There is never a dull moment or lull in this film where you have any chance of getting bored. This movie keeps you on the edge of your seat guessing about what's going to happen next for sure. The chief also does something so unprofessional and so egregious, even I was shocked. He takes this new murder suspect into the room where the dead man's wife is waiting. With absolutely no regards or sympathy for this woman, he lets the suspect talk to her and plead his case, claiming he didn't kill her husband. The wife is so horrified and put off by this circus of a police investigation, she finally shames them all in this scene here.
My God. What kind of people are you? What kind of a place is this?
What was most interesting about the dead man's wife was the way she recoils at first to being touched by Virgil, then becomes overcome with grief and allows human contact. This is by far one of the most powerful and emotional scenes in the film.
Somebody killed him. We don't know who yet.
It's very hot in this room.
Sit down.
No.
The wife then demands Virgil be kept on the case, and she is the driving force behind Virgil being put in charge of the investigation. We also find out the business owner may have been killed because he was going to open up a factory and offer 1,000 jobs, 500 of which were going to black people. So someone actually killed this man because he was going to bring jobs to black people. Okay. Virgil figures the real suspect is likely to be the man who owns Endicott Industries. Based on one of his clues, they head on over to Endicott Industries. They meet up with this wealthy plantation owner still making huge profits off the production of cotton, who speaks like an old slave owner, actually. And it seems this man had an issue with someone from up north coming down to offer black people jobs in, quote, his town. And it's with this questioning that the infamous slap happens, or as it was deemed, the slap heard round the world in this infamous scene.
Was Mr. Colbert ever in this greenhouse, say, last night, about midnight?
Crispy. Yeah. You saw it. I saw it. What are you going to do about it?
Now the movie takes a huge turn as Virgil must hurry to get out of town before he gets killed. Part 2. Now Virgil's very life is in danger, even more so than when he first got off the train. The racist police chief has been challenged to handle Virgil, and an associate remarks the next day that the last police chief they had in Sparta would have shot Virgil as soon as he slapped that white man. Now people are looking at this white police chief a little different because they can see something in him has shifted. For the remaining half of the movie, the police chief will expend all of his energy trying to save Virgil's life. A group of white men chase Virgil and practically run him off the road, then corner him in an abandoned building where they try to attack. But Chief arrives just in the nick of time and gets the men to go on home, but not after they call Chief let's just say the N-word -lover, a lover. This further proves not only is Virgil's life in danger, but maybe the chief's as well. The chief is alienating people in this small town who expect him to behave in the same racist way that they do, and it's just not happening. Virgil gets both Sam and the police chief to replay the night of the homicide, with Sam taking them along for a ride along the same path he was patrolling. When it's discovered Sam is lying about all of his whereabouts on the night he was on patrol, the chief once again decides he's figured out who the murderer was and arrests Sam, his own officer, now placing a third innocent person in jail for a murder they didn't commit. But what makes this movie so crazy at this point is Virgil could rightfully just get out of town and say, screw this investigation. No one here cares about due process or evidence anyway. However, Virgil decides to risk his own life and continue the investigation long into the night, thus the title, In the Heat of the Night, because they are coming to kill Virgil. But thanks to the two men working together, with Chief literally keeping Virgil alive and Virgil doing the actual investigative work, they wind up solving the case in the end. Part 3. The end of this film had a lot of confusing information, with characters coming forward and revealing so much information I had to stop and rewind a few times. Apparently, that 16-year-old girl in the window was the source of so much of this conflict, with her being involved with both Sam and the young man that worked at the diner. I was really surprised the film was so open in 1967 about a teenage girl going to get an abortion for $100. The whole process of her having to go over to the, quote, other side of town where a black woman performed procedures in the back of a store was very eye-opening. And who would have thought that the man that worked in the diner was the actual killer all along? Apparently, he was riding along in the car with the businessman from Chicago and talking about the man opening a factory and bringing jobs to the town. And the guy that was in the passenger seat that worked at the diner was the one that killed him. Like I said, this movie had a lot of twists and turns at the end, but in all, it was a really great story, which was later turned into a very popular TV show back in the 80s. I never watched the TV show myself, but I remember how much my father used to like it. So when we look at a film decades old, we often ask the question, has this film aged well, especially for an audience in 2022? According to The Guardian, In the Heat of the Night is still a brilliant, feverish drama. Norman Jewison's 1967 race drama and forensic murder mystery thriller picked up 5 Oscars in its day, including Best Actor for Rod Steiger. Now on re-release, it stands up well. The sheer tactlessness of its racial confrontation has a forthright quality and a not entirely intentional documentary realism, especially in the scenes shot on location in Sparta, Illinois. standing in for a fictional Mississippi town. Within the heat of the night, it is clear this particular film decides to tackle issues of race head on. There is no tiptoeing around it. Racial tensions are at the heart of this movie that places a black police detective from Philadelphia down in Sparta, Mississippi to investigate a murder alongside a racist police chief. They don't shy away from portraying the police detectives and many people of the town itself as racist. In the beginning, Virgil Tibbs is racially profiled, which is something that has unfortunately not gone away and is still very relevant to today. And despite one's level of expertise or educational background, many people, including police officers, still view you as dangerous if you are a black man in America. I felt that the portrayals were very realistic. The white characters seemed to be written with such honesty and authenticity. Again, not shying away from flat-out racist speech, thoughts, and attitudes, but never making them all just flat-out villains, like the widow, who refused to be touched by Virgil in the beginning, but then wound up coming around. I also feel that the overall point of view that a black man has to fight all kinds of stereotypes and institutionalized racism in order to survive most definitely resonates with today's climate. On January 7, 2022, David Rooney of The Hollywood Reporter wrote, "No other black actor in mid-century Hollywood did more to shift perceptions, expanding representation beyond the degrading stereotypes that had long prevailed. His smolderingly charismatic screen presence provided a non-militant but arguably no less forceful argument for black personhood and humanity, just as the civil rights movement was starting to gain traction." When it comes to representation in Hollywood, for black people, there has always been controversy, especially when it comes to battling against stereotypes or just trying to create space for multifaceted African American characters and not having the burden of one character representing all of the black race on screen. Sidney Poitier came onto the scene, unfortunately, at a time where, according to Afrosapiophile, black people were portrayed on both the big and small screens only in servile, demeaning, and degrading roles. Poitier understood and accepted that as Hollywood's only black leading man, his every move on and off camera was scrutinized, examined, dissected, and judged. He was the one, the man, the one and only one, the exemplar, the prototype, as it were, for all black actors and artists and for black people generally who wanted to make it in the larger world. Indeed, Sidney has been quoted as saying that, "I felt very much as if I were representing 15, 18 million people with every move I made." Now, that is a tremendous burden, but it's also what happens when so few black actors, writers, and directors get to occupy the space in Hollywood and on television. Thankfully, Sidney Poitier took his roles very seriously and understood the impact his portrayals would have on the larger audience. And with the passing of time, I do feel Sidney Poitier's work has held up fairly well, and we can look back on the roles he played without cringe or embarrassment. He carried himself with pride and portrayed African American men in a way that moved the culture forward. If you've never had the opportunity to see any of Sidney Poitier's work, I would strongly suggest you go back and watch some of his films. It's certainly worth a look. Sidney Poitier was one of the most prolific African American icons who broke so many barriers in Hollywood and opened doors for so many black actors that would come after him. Born on February 20th, 1927 in Miami, Sidney Poitier was raised in the Bahamas, where his parents were from, and in his teen years he moved to Harlem, where he began his acting career. Interesting fact about Sidney Poitier I found that I never knew was that he was actually kicked out of his first audition because of his heavy West Indian accent and the fact that he couldn't read. The amazing thing about Sidney Poitier was that after he was kicked out of that audition, he actually wound up taking a job as a janitor for the theater until he was able to, of course, audition and become a member of the ensemble. It was there that he was then discovered for a Broadway play, and Sidney Poitier went on to have one of the most legendary acting careers for African Americans in history. Here are just a handful of his many, many accomplishments. In 1946, he first appeared on Broadway in the production of Lysistrata. In 1958, he was nominated for an Academy Award for the film The Defiant Ones. In 1959, he co-starred with the legendary Dorothy Dandridge in the film Porgy and Bess. In 1963, he was the first African American to win an Academy Award for Best Actor for his film Lilies of the Field. Some of his most notable films also include In the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Sidney Poitier was also honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama in 2009. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. If you enjoyed the content, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, share with others, and leave a comment below. Thank you.